Welcome to Talk South Asian to me. My name is Michelle.
And my name is Anusha. Tune in every Thursdays at 5 p.m. Central and hear us react to each other's stories about mental health and growing up in different South Asian households.
And remember, this podcast is not therapy. Engage with what feels entertaining and resonates with you, and leave what doesn't.
So today, if you can believe it, we're all the way on letter R.
What?
We've made
That's
it so
crazy
far.
to me. I know, isn't that crazy? I was just thinking about that the other day. Like, we made it to R already.
We're almost at the end here.
Yeah, we're at the second half of the alphabet.
I know.
So much good content.
I know. So much rich content.
Right.
Are you ready for our title reveal?
Yes, I'm ready.
So here goes. Today's topic for letter R is resolving relationship conflicts.
Ooh.
I know. I was waiting for some sound effect. Thank you for that.
Sound effect. Yes. It's a good one. This is a good topic. Very relevant.
I love all of our topics, so I'm not going to lie. I feel like we say it on every episode. We just love them all.
We're just so excited about talking about all these things.
All of it.
Yes.
So today, though, I thought we would change it up just a little bit.
Okay.
Today, I'm going to start with more how this topic relates to our South Asian community first, and then I'll dive into kind of breaking it down, just generally speaking. Okay. So as you might imagine, or you might be surprised, I could not find any articles, research or casual articles, about resolving relationships in South Asian communities.
Really?
Nothing.
Like conflict? Resolving conflict?
Yes. The only things that came up about conflict resolution were from a political landscape, like how countries like India and Pakistan resolved conflict as a country on a political standpoint, not like families.
Interesting. So, yeah. That's so surprising to me.
Yeah. That kind of, I really did expect this one to have some articles though, because I was like, this is such a common thing. And
yeah.
I feel like people talk about it all the time, like the way that we conflict, but I guess nobody's talked about the other side of that coin, which is resolving the conflict.
Right.
But fear not, when you can't find things on trusty Google, this day and age, we go to TikTok, and that's what I did.
Right. Yes, TikTok to the rescue.
TikTok to the rescue, exactly. TikTok is honestly, it's replaced Google sometimes for me, as well as, Yelp.
Nice.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about quick thoughts I had, not pertaining to any particular TikTok video. And then from there, I'll talk about the specific TikTok videos I saw. So on the one hand, things that I hear people talk about all the time about conflict resolution, whether in my personal life or my professional life with my clients, is conflict resolution, as we've talked about also in the past, right, happens through cutting fruit and bringing it to you. No apologies.
Yeah.
Just bringing you cut up fruit as a show of love. That's it.
Right.
Another is this was more of just a general thought I had, and it was also reflected in the videos, which I'll talk about in a moment, which was that any resolution that might happen, that you might see growing up in the community, it doesn't really happen in front of kids. The resolutions seemingly tend to happen, if they happen, behind closed doors, or you just forget about it and you move on. They just don't happen. But as far as actual TikTok content goes and what I saw, there was this one person I want to highlight real fast. Her name is Simi. Her handle is @SimiBrar, and she is a future therapist. She's getting her master's in psychology right now, and she does these really amazing videos. Yeah, go Simi.
Yeah.
She does these amazing videos on how she sees some of these traumas or wounds or things that she's picking up on in South Asian households and even her own household, and she's going through that journey herself, through her education, her I think her own therapy she talks about maybe, but basically she had a couple of things on resolving relationships, what that tends to look like, that I really liked, so I wanted to talk about it. there were 2 videos. The
Okay.
first one primarily talks about the topic of having conflict with her mom about setting boundaries around like privacy.
Oh, okay. It's a good
So
one.
this is the
Good
conflict,
topic.
right?
Okay.
The conflict is she tried to set a boundary with her mom about privacy, and a conflict arose from that. So what she talked about in response to like how does resolving this conflict look like, a couple of different things. One, it looks like either her mom's shutting down.
Yeah.
2, her mom gets really defensive and says things like,
Mm,
it's not like I committed a crime. Well, then I guess I'm just a bad mom. And like kind of
mhm.
policing her, like her daughter's tone and deflecting the issue. Oh, you're using that tone of voice with me, then I don't want to, we can't talk about this because now the issue
Right.
is about the tone of voice rather than, you know, the issue.
Right.
Simi goes on to say like another like big tactic that shows up a lot is emotional manipulation, you know, in the form
Mm,
of saying like, oh, like my head hurts, this is affecting my blood pressure, I can't talk about this, or like
yeah.
crying, but not crying as like crying genuinely, but crying as a way to manipulate the situation and to stop it altogether, and for her to stop talking about this and take care of her mom.
Yeah.
And the other big one that she talks about that really resonated is sweeping things under the rug and never talking about them again. Like that's the
Mm,
go-to desire in conflict resolution is
right.
let's just figure this happened. Let's just not talk about it. It's okay. And she goes on to say like, actually she doesn't actually say this, but I was reflecting on what she said and like how she had also said like, you know, as a grown up, like she doesn't also like to get into arguments and like conflicts. Like she's always very aversive to that. And so that reminded me, my connection with that was, you know, sweeping things under the rug and like emotionally manipulating and like not wanting to talk about things in like a understanding, curious way tends to create
Mm,
this avoidance of, you know, communication altogether, especially conflict oriented communication. And it kind of
yes.
lends itself towards more people pleasing behaviors, right? Because
Yes.
you upset someone so much to the point of them saying, like, oh, I guess I'm a terrible mom then, and like crying. You're naturally going to feel a lot of guilt, which means you're naturally
Yes.
going to want to jump in and be like, oh my gosh, like, that was so mean to me. Like, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make you cry, mom. Of course, you're not a bad mom, right? It increases your likelihood of people pleasing.
Right. That
Um,
makes sense to me.
yeah.
It's very insightful.
Yeah.
Like the emotional manipulation leading to people pleasing tendencies. Wow.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah.
The other video that I saw of hers that I really liked too, this one where the conflict was around siblings. And so she
Okay.
was talking about like fighting with siblings and how anytime there would be fights with siblings, her parents would be quick to like jump in and stop them and basically like just time out, don't fight, and like that's it. There's no resolution, there's no like getting
Mm,
together and saying like what was the problem, what can we do. It was just stop fighting, break it up, that's it, end of discussion, you know, more avoidance
yeah.
basically.
Okay.
um and she goes on to talk about this particular situation in which there was a misunderstanding between her and her brother, and her brother got in trouble, and he, from the perception, it looked like the sister had set him up to get in trouble. And so
Mm,
she had gone on to say like, well, of course she doesn't blame him. Like what the brother did was for about a month, he basically silent treatmented his sister.
oh
And she
no.
was talking about like, even though I don't blame him, like this is what we saw, like silent treatment was normal, and then one day we don't talk about it and things just go back to normal.
Like once you're done with the silent treatment,
Yeah, once
like
you've
it's
had
back
enough
to
and you need
normal.
something, it's
Yeah.
just like, all right, I've had enough. This is fine.
Yeah. Again, like you said, conflict avoidance.
Yeah, exactly. And um she goes on to kind of wrap this up, and like what she saw modeled to her was basically conflict through screaming, through silent treatment, through passive aggressive communication, you know, like slamming kitchen doors instead of saying something is wrong.
Mm,
um Bringing in the
dishes.
kids, yeah, like vigorously cleaning those dishes.
Yes.
um Bringing like the kids into the loop and like basically like almost like complaining or talking to the kids about the other parent, or even like saying like take sides in this conflict, you know, putting that responsibility on a child. But then that despite all of that, without having any real resolution, things would just go back to normal one day, randomly. So I hope you notice a pattern here.
Yeah.
Conflict is getting resolved, but is it really getting resolved, or is the conflict just stopping?
Being avoided.
Because nobody does
being
anything
avoided.
with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's being avoided, the conflict.
Exactly. The real issue of the conflict is not being resolved, but the tension of the conflict is resolved because everybody's just like, let's just avoid it. Let's just ignore it.
And this, maybe we'll get into this a little bit later, but like, is that avoidance leading to resentment and like building up? And like when the next conflict happens, you're blowing up more, or like more tension.
Yeah.
There's more tension.
Yeah. That is a great point.
Yes.
Spoiler alert. Yes.
Spoiler!
Absolutely. That was very insightful, Michelle. You spoiled it all.
Thanks. Sorry, my bad.
No, I'm totally kidding. That was a good catch, though. It is. It does lead to resentment building.
Yeah, but it's true. Like in the moment, it's when you're in that part of that conflict, like, you know, your judgment is clouded, you're taken over by your emotions, right? And so you don't realize that, but just like outside looking in, like just with you explaining some of these videos, I think it's really helpful to view these types of situations in like that third person perspective. Like, okay, like, yep, we avoided the conflict. What's next? When the next conflict comes around, is the tension even more, right? Like, is there more resentment?
Yeah, exactly. And it just like subtly keeps building and building. It's like, you know, it's like a coin bank, right? You just keep adding things into it, but nothing is being deposited. At a certain point, you just can't add things. It's at its full and it's going to break.
Yes.
Okay, so the next video that I saw on TikTok, I'm sharing this more for humorous reasons. It doesn't,
I'm ready.
I mean, it might be true, and I think it is true, but this is more to add just a little bit of humor. It's by...
We love humor.
Yes, we love humor. Humor is our coping mechanism. Here we go.
Coping mechanism.
The video was by Srijan at the handle Srijan Mock. And basically in this video, it's a really quick one. He just says, it's not the smartest or most logical person who wins an argument in a Desi household. It's the oldest. So don't bother trying. Like, don't bother trying to win an argument.
Wait, can you repeat that one more time? Can you repeat that one more time?
It's not the smartest or most logical person who wins arguments in Desi households. Yes. It's the oldest. So don't bother trying.
Right.
He's not wrong.
That's true. He's not wrong.
Yeah, because
I've seen that.
Yeah, whether it's siblings, whether it's parents, people pull the age card.
Yes. It's very common.
I'm older. I know. Don't argue with me, you know? Yeah. So those were my thoughts on how this shows up in the South Asian community. Like I said, there wasn't a lot of like actual research on it. So thank you, Simi, real MVP of this episode.
There you
coming
go.
in with all this helpful info.
Yeah.
But to talk about maybe a little bit more broad, now that we've talked about all the ways that aren't helpful in resolving conflict, let's talk about the ways that are helpful in resolving conflict.
Okay.
So most of the information that I'm going to share today, I got from choosingtherapy.com. And it was an article on that site written by Kimberly, a licensed marriage and family therapist.
Okay.
And she sourced some of her quotes from like a lot of different therapists. So this isn't just, you know, her work, but a lot of different therapists' wisdom.
Okay.
So the article talks about like some of the most common causes of conflicts to kind of set the stage. So the most common cause of conflict, and there are plenty, but here are a couple. Having different personalities, having different standards, having different expectations, having different communication styles, big one.
That's a big one.
When couples stop feeling and treating each other like friends, like best friends. When you start trying to change one another. When you have control issues, when you have trust issues, when you have commitment issues, and even when you have like individual history of trauma, right? So lots of reasons why we can get in a conflict. Way too many.
Yeah.
But is conflict itself bad?
No, it shouldn't be.
It is definitely not. You're right.
It helps people
conflict
grow.
Is normal. Yeah, conflict's how you grow. Conflict is how you can create understanding. It is absolutely normal.
I'm saying that as in fear of conflict still. Which we'll get into.
I get it.
And like the inside Michelle's like, are you sure you believe that? Still. I want to believe that.
Yeah. Well, believing one thing and doing are technically two different things.
Right.
I get it.
Right. Right.
The idealistic side of us, the one that's recovering people pleasers, wants to believe it, does believe it, but there's a little bit of doubt. It's okay.
Yes. And that's okay. That's normal.
It's normal.
We're human. We humans.
We human. Exactly. So, Michelle, have you heard of Dr. John and Julie Gottman?
That name sounds so familiar. I don't know from where, though.
Gottman is the one that created those 5 love languages.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go, the love languages.
So, Dr. John and Julie Gottman are psychologists, and they're, pretty much seen as relationship experts. So, they have this one quote that really stood out to me. Happy relationships aren't relationships where there is no fighting. They are relationships where repairs are made after regrettable incidents happen and where a couple connects with each other day to day. Right? This kind of just, continue to highlight the idea of like relationships are normal. It's not like that we fight that's the problem. It's how we make up that makes or breaks a relationship. And that we are, in our day-to-day trying to constantly turn towards one another, see each other with love and like, attempting to meet one another's needs on a day-to-day basis. Those are the protective things that can make or break relationships. But coming back again, more specifically to conflict, right? So the Gottmans, I guess we can call them the Gottmans, have created this concept, right, of like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that are like destructive negativity in conflicts and like need to be avoided at all costs. Are you familiar with what those 4 might be?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Here we go. 1 is criticism. So things like, like name calling, personal attacks, things like that.
Okay.
2, defensiveness.
Ooh,
when you deflect. Yeah. And like everybody does that, right? Like it's natural. Defensiveness, also in the way of like maybe blaming somebody, like turning that blame and putting it back on somebody, bringing up past issues, can be a form of defensiveness. The 3rd thing is contempt. Things like, I find it hard to like define contempt, but it when you see it, things like when you're sneering, when you're like rolling your eyes, when you're like sighing dramatically.
Oh my gosh, the sighing. Oh,
yeah. That really gets a lot of people. Those are all like signs of showing contempt. And the fourth one is a biggie. Stonewalling, aka like silent treatment, aka avoidance.
That's like one of my, not my pet peeves, like something I dislike a lot. Is silent treatment. Like I don't like it at all.
Yeah. I bet you got that a lot though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Usually the people who like, don't do that, got it a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and ignoring. I guess that's what the same thing as silent treatment.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, ignored. Avoiding, ignoring, silent treatment, stonewalling. Oh yeah, all like synonyms of one another. And according to the Gottmans, these 4 things are the absolute most destructive things that can happen in a relationship and deteriorate relationships. Criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling, aka silent treatment. So we talked about all the ways what not to do, what's unhelpful. Yes. We've yet to talk about what is helpful. So buckle in. I've got a big list. You ready for it?
I'm ready.
Okay. So here are like some common reoccurring tips and thoughts that therapists have around best ways to resolve conflicts. 1 being using more I statements instead of like you. Like sometimes we're getting in like a blaming defensive stage. We're always like, oh yeah, well you did this and like you always do this. XXX. Instead of going with all the you, which puts people on the defensive, lean back and lean into a little bit more of that, like, what are you feeling, and communicate what you're feeling. So statements like, I feel X when Y happens, feels a lot more differently than saying, you're always doing this, and so of course I'm going to be mean because you do this. You know, that it gives two different feelings for a person.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But the therapist who said this wants to make the note that this only works best in a relationship where vulnerability and honesty are allowed and feel safe.
Yes.
I love that distinction because that's so true. If there's no space for your feelings and they're not allowed and they're ignored, they're belittled, this isn't necessarily a very helpful tactic to begin with.
Yeah.
Okay, ready for another one?
Yes.
This is a big one, but not a lot of people take this, or some people get triggered by this. Taking time out when things get too heated. Calling a break. This I find, so actually when Adi and I first were dating, and I needed a break from the situation, although for me, like, I was maybe not communicating the best way possible. Like, this was a trigger for Adi. Like, he'd be like, don't, like, walk away, like, don't leave. I don't want to have a break. Like, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
It can be a triggering thing for people, but I think it is important to realize, like, if both parties can take time apart to just regulate on their own, that could be so helpful in just bringing, like, the levels back down, and then trying again when everybody's a little bit more regulated.
Right.
This one caught me a little bit by surprise, but having been in a relationship for like nearly 10 years now, this makes sense to me. It's agreeing to disagree.
Yes, done that a lot.
Yeah, you know, like, you don't both need to agree on everything. You're gonna have different opinions on some things, and, like, as long as it's not like a huge, big, important value for you that you would be sacrificing, let it go. It's okay. Let them have their own opinions. Don't have to agree on everything.
Right.
You agree with that? You're like,
yeah. No, I think it's important. I mean, I'm like at 10 years too, basically. And I would say we've agreed to disagree a lot too. Obviously, like, not on the big things, but like the small things.
Right.
And I think that's okay. Like, we're different people. We're unique.
Exactly. Let's see what else. This one is my absolute favorite. I kind of like tweaked it and added my own spin on it, but essentially the tip is be curious, listen to listen, not respond, and validate. So this one's all about, like, tuning in to your partner, letting them finish, letting them say their piece, asking questions from a curious place, not like a judgmental place, and listening to understand them and their feelings rather than, okay, I gotta get ready to make my notes and, like, state my case. No, listen to what they're saying, validate their feelings, and then you can, you know, whatever needs to happen later, if you need to explain your intention or, like, apologize or, like, whatever it is happens later. But the first step is being curious to what they're saying, listening fully without interrupting to understand what they're saying, and then validating their feelings. That's my favorite thing.
I like that. Listen to listen and not to respond. Listen to validate.
Yeah, because more often than not, you know, sometimes when we're in arguments or, you know, even just generally in life, we do tend to listen, ready to, like, talk about us again.
And
it doesn't
I'm
make for
guilty
good
of
connection.
this too. I'm guilty of this too. Like, when I'm listening to respond naturally to, like, in a heated conversation.
Yeah, it happens.
Like, I tend to, like, interrupt, right? So, like, when you're actually listening to listen and validate, you are taking that step back and giving that person a chance to fully share what they want to share.
Exactly. And that it is a struggle. This is not easy by any means, because you're just like, but I didn't mean to, or I didn't, that's not what I meant. Adi and I do this all the time to each other. It's his pet peeve, but he does it too, and I love pointing out when he does it. I probably shouldn't. The other thing is, you know, as I said, right, that was a first step. Listen, be curious, and validate. The second piece of it can be, like, apologize and take responsibility for your part in it.
Yeah.
When arguments happen, when conflict happens, inevitably both parties have likely created a scenario in which they've both contributed to that situation.
Right.
In different ways. Maybe not equal, but in different ways. Usually both parties contribute to situations like that arising. So recognize that it's not like, oh, this is all your fault, this is all my fault. Just apologize for what your part is and take responsibility for that.
Yeah. That's big too.
I think that goes a long way.
Takes a lot of security and courage in yourself to take that step.
Yeah. And like, it's good to like remember and remind, like, if I'm apologizing, I'm not apologizing for everything. I'm apologizing for the part I might have played in what I've done, and how can I do better next time, knowing what I know now.
Exactly.
Yeah. This next one, again, another one of my favorites. I say this to my couple clients all the time. When you are arguing, it is very, very, very important to remember it is not you versus you. You are both not fighting one another. You have to let go of that idea, because when you hold on to, I'm having an argument with my partner, you're so much more in the headspace of, I need to win this argument.
Yes.
No. It's not about I versus you. It's about us versus the problem. Yes. Us versus the situation. Yeah. I think that reframe is amazing. Love it.
Yeah. I think I heard that for the first time like a couple years ago from like Jay Shetty's account on Instagram.
Yeah,
like
he says it too.
Some of his videos. Yeah. So and definitely something that I try to be be mindful of with my family, with Alima and like everyone that I have a relationship with, that it's not, me versus you. It's us versus the issue or the problem or the circumstance.
Yeah, exactly. I have no idea who like originally came up with this thought, but I think that is one of the most important things in a conflict. And like, I think that's a really important reframe that helps a lot of like couples too is, well, I won't get into it. There's a lot of things that could go into that. We're not going to get into it. It's fine.
Okay. Are you sure?
I'm sure.
Okay.
Moving on. This one, again, I added like a little tweak of my own thing to it. So the original thing was compromise, but I added a little tweak of compromise, not sacrifice. So you've already heard, Michelle, right? I'm always talking about how things are on a spectrum. When we are sacrificing, we are giving something important up. Right. Compromise is a range of choices that we would be okay with. There's one ideal, perhaps, one perfect ideal, but there's lots of things that we're also like, okay, yeah, I could live with that. Yeah, I'm okay with that we would genuinely be fine with. Compromising, healthy, necessary for relationships. Sacrificing, not so healthy. We don't want to do it, especially when it comes to the big, important, value-based things. Definitely don't want to do it. Those things build resentment so fast.
They do.
Yeah. Let's see. So I actually like the way this one therapist phrased this one. The quote was, stop following your thoughts and start focusing on your feelings.
Stop following your thoughts and start focusing on your feelings.
Yeah. Let me explain that. So what the thought or what this quote is basically saying is essentially the quickest way to understand one another and to like really nip the real root of the conflict in the bud is to talk about how somebody made you feel or what they did that made you feel a certain way. Because when we talk about feelings, I mean, most people aren't going to sit here and be like, that's not how you feel. No one's going to say that. But if you say, this is what you did, people are going to argue back. That's not what I did. Right. Yeah. So if you want to nip the real issue in the bud, talk about feelings. Forget the thoughts that say, that make assumptions. Oh, well, he probably does because of this. And he didn't do this because of that. And he meant to hurt me and he meant to do this. Stop following those thoughts and start following the feelings.
Right.
That's a good one, right?
And I think it connects to the I statements.
Exactly.
Like your thoughts could lead you to like think like the person did that, the person did this, instead of focusing on what you feel and what, I feel this, I statements.
Exactly. The next one, as you know, another one of my personal faves, self-soothing or regulating.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of this. I honestly think that learning how to regulate is a basic life skill that we are not taught, but we should know.
Mm-hmm.
When we can regulate, particularly in a conflict, we can stay calm and we can assertively communicate our wants, our needs, our feelings.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What are some examples of ways maybe that you
to regulate?
Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, the biggest way to regulate is to use your breath.
Mm-hmm.
When
It's
you're
like the physical.
feeling, yeah, exactly, right? Like imagine when you must have felt like anxious or like stressed or even like fearful.
Mm-hmm.
Do you notice like typically your breath gets a little bit shallow?
Yeah.
You have a harder time breathing. You're not breathing as fully. But exactly. You take a deep breath like that, you are literally regulating.
Yes.
And it's actually a really cool thing. So like try it next time like you feel a little bit like dysregulated, like a little anxious, a little bit, you know, like fearful or stressed. Just sit there and take like 5 really deep breaths. Like let your belly like really fill up and exhale slowly, and you'll notice it kind of creates like almost like an instant pain reliever effect.
Yes,
where you feel like calmness come over your body.
Yeah, I tell my patients to smell flowers and blow out birthday candles.
Yes, I love that. I love that.
And I do it too myself when I do feel anxious or just pent up or really stressed, and it makes a huge difference. But it really does take some consciousness and like being mindful of your, like you have to literally step out of how stressed you're feeling and take a minute and be like, okay, I'm feeling stressed. I'm feeling this way. I feel this shallow breath. I want to do this, something to change it. So let me take those deep breaths. And that piece is still so hard sometimes for me to get to, right? Like get out of that situation, that state I'm in, and then like recognize the state I am, like how I am, and then taking that step to take those deep breaths. Because in the moment, it's so hard to think logically when your emotions are on such on a high.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more dysregulated, the harder it is.
Right. But learning about it and being aware about it. Yeah, it's the first step.
Yeah. And you got to start somewhere, you know. None of us are going to start off and immediately like feel that quick, immediate effect, right? I feel that way now because I've practiced it for so long. In the beginning, it was kind of like, okay, I'm like a little bit better, but like I'm still pretty charged. And then it got a little bit better, even though I was still a little charged. And then I would get better and I would be able to actually take a step back and like think before speaking.
Right.
There's some steps here, but you got to start somewhere.
Right.
Okay, let's see what else. I got 3 more. Well, really 2 more. Okay. One of them is use humor.
Yes.
To diffuse situations. Although, again, I will say use this at your own risk. Not everybody is comfortable using humor in an argument setting.
Yes, and it can lead to conflict avoidance. If
too much of that. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes people use that humor to make too light of the situation, to avoid the situation. And here's the thing. Balance in all things. And with humor, exactly like you said, right? We don't want to use it as a tool to like avoid the situation, but it can be helpful to kind of remind ourselves like, hey, like we love this person, you know, we don't want to hurt them. We don't want to be hurt. We, at the end of the day, love each other. And adding a little bit of that humor can kind of diffuse that icky tension that can build up during these conflicts. But again, like I said, sometimes, you know, on the other side of it, like for example, in the beginning of the relationship, like I did not like when Avi used humor, and like, you know, Avi's all about humor always.
He loves humor.
He loves
you know
humor.
that.
But for me, my perception of that humor use was, oh, you're not taking the situation seriously. You're not taking me seriously. You're like deflecting. But, you know, as I got some space from those moments, like I also like now I will use humor too in like other ways, and I'll recognize like, no, like humor can serve a purpose here. Like I don't need to see it as he's not taking this seriously. I can see it as he's uncomfortable. He wants to know he and I are still connected and like feeling love, and like it's not all mean and like anger here. So once we can make that reframe, using humor, I think, can be a really helpful tool to also resolve some of these conflicts and like just kind of diffuse the situation to help resolve the conflict.
Right.
Okay. One really big one, ground rules or fair fighting rules. Have you heard of this, Michelle?
No.
Okay. So fair fighting rules, ground rules, is exactly how it sounds. Getting together and figuring out some ground rules for when you fight.
Okay.
I typically use this for all of my couples, but especially my high conflict couples. So these are things like, and okay, let me be clear. When I say we have these ground rules, do not point fingers at each other and be like, you're not doing this rule. Yeah. We don't want to do that. We're not keeping score here.
Right.
But, having these like healthy boundaries in the conflict so things don't get out of hand. For example, some rules can look like making sure that we stay focused on the one issue at hand and not bringing up every issue from the past and talking about it all at once. Listening without interrupting and paying attention to like the emotions, the body language.
Right.
Showing respect to each other's perspectives. Another thing is maybe setting kind of a ground rule of, okay, we're going to take a break if things start to get heated. For example, if we start to yell, if we start to name call, okay, time out, we need to take a break. And then after we take a break, we're going to regulate on our own, and then we're going to come back and maybe start with some affection, maybe start with a quick hug, or maybe not a quick hug, like a long hug, to get some of that feeling of, no, I still love you. We're fighting. We're in the middle of this, but I still love you.
Yeah. Some reassurance.
Yeah, exactly. And some other like good ground rules, like I always tell people to include: no yelling, no threatening, no cursing, no stonewalling. Not helpful. We're just not going to do it. If we do that, time out. We need a time out. This is not going to be a productive conversation.
Yeah.
Other rules: both parties can own what they did to contribute to the issues. So apologize. Take part for whatever you did or could have done. Be curious. Don't make assumptions. Don't say never or always. That's a big one.
Yeah.
And this one I actually heard from somebody else and like I really liked it, which is look each other in the eye when you're talking. I love that. Simple, but I think important. Being able to look the person you love in the eyes instead of just being like, oh, like you're looking all over the place being angry instead of at the person. I think it can shift your mood a little.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of, I think, really, really good tips. But let's talk real quick about preventative measures. Ideally, we don't even want to be, in a conflict. Will it happen? Yes, of course. Is it normal? 100%. Is it healthy?
Yeah.
Yes, it can be.
Yeah.
And while you know now how to resolve it in a very healthy way, we can also talk about like how can we do our best to prevent such things from happening. And these things have come straight from Gottman. Okay. The two things they talk about are date nights. So basically date nights, because it's all about, building your friendship again, doing little fun things together, building your connection, and basically just building this amount of positive interactions so that when negative things happen, they don't feel as negative because you have this huge amount of like love still.
Yes.
You want that ratio to be like very, different, very much on the scale of positive to negative, right?
Yes.
The other thing that Gottmans talk about is responding to bids for connections as often as possible. So that things don't get pent up and can be like protective factors. Again, the ratio of like love versus frustration.
Yeah.
So do you know what I mean by when I say bids of connection though?
Like, do you mean like bids, like the person is needing some type of connection or like, is that what you mean? Like an ask and you're acknowledging it and you're meeting it?
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly that. And like sometimes that's a verbal thing, sometimes it's a nonverbal thing. So for example, I'll give you an example. Like for example, Adi at nighttime, like he likes to talk while we go to bed. At nighttime, I am B. I just want to read and then just go to bed.
Right.
And like this is where we kind of like disconnect there. So like sometimes he's like, hey, like can we talk today? And like if I take that bid for connection, I'm creating positive interaction, saying, okay, sure, I'll put my phone away and then we can have a conversation about how was our day? Like, what are we going to do this weekend? But if I'm like, I really just don't want to today, like, I'm really not feeling it, like, that's okay. But recognize you've not taken that bid for connection.
Right.
And that's going to add up if you do it too many times.
Right.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Yeah. So that was a lot of information, do's and don'ts. What are your thoughts?
No, I mean, all of this is really helpful to know, like, sheds a different light on conflict. I'm like trying to think back to like when I studied conflict or studied relationships in college, and like I do remember learning some of these things, but you know, it's been so much time, so it's like nice to hear it again and like hear it in different contexts and talk about, you know, how it can occur in our culture and how resolving conflicts can happen or not resolving conflicts can happen, you know, in our culture, right? And it's really helpful to like think about this relationships in general, right? Like it's not just romantic. It could be like your familial relationships, work-related, friends. Could be, you know, anything. So I'm excited to get into our stories. But it was really good background information. Like you did a great job with the research and it was helpful tips and just a great framework to use, you know, moving forward. Some tools to take with you.
Absolutely. Well, I hope you and everybody took some notes because that was a chock full of good advice, actually.
It was.
So thank you to the person who wrote that article and had this idea to do that. That was awesome.
Yes. Awesome.
So let's pivot towards my story. Yeah?
Okay. I'm ready.
All right. Here we go. So I will start as usual, kind of looking way back towards our childhood blueprints, name dropping our third podcast.
Yes.
So
long
starting,
ago.
I know, and we're already at R. My goodness.
Yes.
So starting with my parents, you know, I will say, Mom, if you're listening, I love you. I know you don't do these things anymore, but we're going to talk.
There you go.
My mom used to be, and sometimes can be now, pretty like passive aggressive. You know, this thing that I said earlier about how Simi talked about her mom slamming like kitchen doors. Oh my God, my mom did that. She would slam like cabinet doors when she was upset. Something which I picked up on early in my relationship as well. Not great. I don't do it anymore though.
Good. You recognize
other things. Yeah, we gotta recognize and do differently. We can be good.
Right.
We can be better.
Break the cycle.
End the cycle. You know, I'm always a little hesitant when we say these cute, like awesome phrases, end the cycle. And I'm like, what does it mean? Because apparently we said something. I am not going to talk about it. Apparently we said something earlier. I will not say what it was, but apparently it means something else.
Yes.
I think we're not doing this anymore.
Is fun. Break the cycle.
I don't know. Watch somebody be like, this actually means this.
That's fine. Not to us. Okay.
Not to us, it means what it means.
Yes.
So going back to like what my mom did, right? Like she was a little bit passive aggressive. She would, you know, she'd be pretty defensive and like she definitely had like the piece of emotional manipulation that is like the guilting. Again, not on purpose. I am fairly certain that is a very intergenerational trauma thing. She has picked it up and she has continued to model it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like guilting you into doing things her original way. Silent treatment. Oh yeah, big on that. Yelling, not too often, but yeah, yelling. And she also has this thing, which I've unfortunately picked up as well, which is like, if she's like really excited, actually I do this when I'm excited. She doesn't do this. But when she's like frustrated, she'll like slap your arm or like, you know, just kind of like swat you. Not like hard, but like she'll swat you. Like she'll just react quickly.
Yeah.
I have picked up on that unfortunate habit. I'm working on breaking that one. Haven't quite succeeded yet.
Yeah. That's okay. You're recognizing it. That's what matters.
It's a work in progress, guys.
Work in progress. There you go.
Yeah. And her last piece of, I mean, that's how she typically tended to try and resolve conflict. That's how she responded to it. But like the way that she really ended up resolving conflict at the end of the day always ended up being forced cheerfulness.
Forced cheerfulness.
To other people. Not when it's about her. Like when she's affected, it's all these other things. But when she might cause somebody else to be upset. It's all of those things plus, okay, but cheer up, like it's done now. We're done with it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on type of thing.
Yeah.
My dad, on the other hand, somewhat similar, but kind of different. He would rarely ever be like upset. He was very much like, it's fine, whatever. But when dad did get upset and like his buttons were really pushed, he like, you could see it, like it's all over his face, like he's like really mad, and like he'll do like a quick, like not like a yelling, like I don't think dad yelled, but like his voice carries a lot of bass, so he would raise his voice a little bit. And like mom and I, when I was in high school, we used to fight all the time. Dad, when dad raised his voice, I was like, all right, I'm zipping my lips, like this is serious.
Yeah.
When dad is there, like, okay, I really need to back off. That was kind of the conflict resolution, I guess, like there.
Yeah.
But more so when it became like things about mom and dad, though, more often than not, he would, like I said, like sweep things under the rug. Like, it's fine, whatever.
Yeah.
And occasionally turn things into jokes, you know, like making really light of the situation, using humor in the deflecting way that you were talking about, which did not serve situations well in my mom's case. And when it came to me, like if dad did something to me, his conflict resolution is he would bring me fruits up to my room while I studied. He'd never say sorry, just be like, eat your fruits.
My dad would take it a step further and just put grapes in his hand and give it to me, or like try to feed me. I'm like, oh my goodness.
I'm feeding you.
It's the effort,
Extra love.
to avoid the conflict. It's the effort for me.
It's the effort, exactly. But like I said earlier as well, though, I didn't often see my parents like resolve their conflicts. Like truly resolve conflicts. Occasionally I would, like when I was a little bit older, like I would see them like maybe like dad would try and like hug it out and like still use humor. I don't think anything, and like sometimes say apology, but like his apologies were kind of just like, okay, sorry, I won't do it again. Not like I'm understanding your feeling. I understand what I did.
Not true resolution.
Yeah, but there was a better attempt than maybe prior when I didn't notice anything at all. So as you can imagine, like if that is the things, if these are the things that are being modeled to me, like this is what conflict looks like, this is how we can handle conflict. Obviously, like most people, I become a huge people pleaser, and I avoided conflicts at all costs. I definitely, I had that, I told you right before in a previous episode, right? I have this crown of like, you're the good girl. You're always so obedient, silent, non-confrontational. And I mean, I'm not proud of it now, but I was proud of it then. And so that kind of just continued to like feed this like people pleasy thing up until, I will say, high school. In high school, I started, as any natural kid would, individualizing from the family, having my own, interests, wants, beliefs, needs, blah, 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 that maybe didn't align with family. But unfortunately, right around that time too, my mom's dad passed away. So she,
so sorry.
Yeah, it was a really sad time, and like it was very like difficult and confusing and like grieving and like lots of just swirly, lots of emotions, high tense situations. And my mom I don't think she really knew how to properly grieve through that.
Yeah.
And I think that really like fed her. Like my mom was always a helicopter parent, like not that bad, but like helicopter parent nonetheless. I think in high school, though, after her dad passed away, I think she felt really like out of control and powerless, though. And like, I think it really added to her feeling like urge and need to like over control me and like make sure that I was exactly the way she needed me to be and like wanted me to be. So we had a lot of fights back then, like so many fights almost every other day. And my dad was traveling all the time back then. So he's usually like the peacekeeper. And the one who gets in between us and is literally like, stop. But he wasn't there. So we really got into it a lot. And again, like there was really not a lot of conflict resolution when those things happened.
Yeah.
I think like I would cry, mom would cry.
Yeah.
First she'd get mad because mom didn't like crying. Like she kind of saw that, I think, from her own childhood trauma as like kind of a weakness. And so she'd get initially mad, like, why are you crying? And like, it wasn't even like, whatever. And then she'd eventually feel really bad and like she'd tear up but never cry. And then just be like, okay, I'm sorry. It's like, it's fine. Like, let's get over this.
Yeah.
So not, again, really addressing any issues, really resolving it, because these things just kept happening anyway. But outside of like a family setting with friendships, I think you'll remember I was also a huge people pleaser when it came to friendships, and I was very conflict averse. If I could help it, I would never bring up anything that bothered me, and I would just kind of silently let that resentment build, but I wouldn't bring it up. Yeah. Super unhealthy, but I did that.
Yeah.
I swallowed it.
Yeah, that's fair. I do that too sometimes still.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard, especially because friendships they're precious, they're found family, and there's an element of belongingness outside of families that maybe we didn't always feel we fit in.
Right.
It's hard. Yeah. When it came to like career wise, like professors and like supervisors and things like that, again, I tended to be pretty conflict avoidy. There's an added layer of not just people pleasing, but like authority figures.
Right.
So I didn't often get into a lot of conflict. That is not me now. Now, when I get angry, I am like, I will let you know, like, that doesn't feel right to me, and here are the reasons why. Respectfully. But now I don't see it as like that authority struggle anymore.
Good. I'm so proud of you. That's awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it just took me a little bit of confidence building in where I'm at.
Yeah, that's a lot still, you've grown.
Yeah. The last thing that I'll share, of course, drum roll please, partner.
Drum roll.
So with Adi, like I said, right, we've been together nearly 10 years now, and he's kind of seen me like really grow and like have my wounds, have my traumas, and heal from all of that. So I have been all over the map on this one. But when I first started dating him, I was very much similar with everybody else. Like I avoided conflict. I was passive aggressive. I was definitely like all about silent treatment because that's what I saw. And like sometimes the silent treatment also came out of like I was so overwhelmed and like flooded that I would just shut down straight. But nothing that was helpful. Those things just were not helpful, right?
Yeah.
And then eventually, like, like we talked about, I went to therapy. I learned some helpful coping things. But I also had a lot of anger. So that anger quickly took me from one end of the spectrum to the complete opposite. Not healthy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when I got angry or like in conflict, like I wasn't like aggressive, but I was very much like yelling and like, oftentimes growing up and like sometimes even now, like I don't feel really heard unless I yell. So I've kind of taught myself I need to yell in order to be heard. Yeah. I'm trying, this is something I like actually constantly struggle with actively. So I'm trying to like reframe that even now of like, I can communicate, and like if I get to a point of yelling and I'm not being heard, I can get even quieter. Instead of getting louder, I'll get quieter. It's not easy. It's hard.
Yeah.
But we're working on it.
You got to be mindful of it. It's good that you're like, recognize and you're realizing like what you want and how you want to deal with it now, which is awesome.
But it was a long journey there. I think the turning point for me was truly when I got to such a point that it kind of broke my heart when it happened. So one time, I don't even remember what we were talking about, but we got into an argument about something, and I don't think I was like name calling or anything, but what I was like pointing out things like I think in like serial order of like this happened, like you did this and you did that, and like this is so frustrating for me, and you did this and you did that, and I think that was just too much all at once, so intense that I think maybe that was happening too much. I was in a really bad place in my life, career wise, and like just a lot of things wise. And I think that I maybe had done that so often that what Adi said next was like, damn, like, am I like that bad of a partner? And like, that broke my heart. I was like, oh my God, like, he took what I was saying, his actions, and he made it like about him as a person. And like that broke my heart so much. And that was a true, genuine turning point for me, recognizing like this is not the way to fight. Like fighting needs to happen, because he was doing things that were not okay, that weren't helpful. But the way I communicated it could have been so different. And I think I didn't really realize that until I saw how my words could impact somebody like that.
Yeah.
So the last thing I'll say is the way that I like to communicate now is it's this thing, there's this like whole acronym for it. It's called Dear Man. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't.
It's an acronym, and it stands for like D for describe the situations with facts, no judgment. E for express your emotions using I feel statements. A for assertively ask for what you want, what you need, what your expectation is. R technically is to reinforce the person if they're listening, if they're being validating, if they're understanding, just positively reinforce it and say like, thank you for doing this. I see that you're listening and not being defensive. I appreciate that. But I actually prefer the R to be regulate, because I need that.
Yeah, that's good.
Everybody
it could
does.
Be dear, like 2 R's.
Yeah, dear. The M is be mindful of what issue you are talking about and try not to get off topic into like all the other topics that you could be talking about. A, I typically ignore this one. It's appear confident, maintain eye contact. I think this one serves better when you're like in a professional setting. Although I definitely agree with maintain eye contact.
Yeah.
Appear confident. I don't know. If you're feeling wobbly, be wobbly. It's okay. Be vulnerable.
Right.
And the last one is negotiate, aka like compromise. Yeah. If the person can't meet your need exactly the way you want them, the expectation, compromise. What can they do? Where can they meet you halfway?
I like that acronym.
Yeah.
I like it.
So I really, really resonate with this, like, Dear Man. I did not come up with this. I don't know who did. It's just a thing that's available to therapists. And like, I love it. I tell everybody about it. Everybody who ever comes to me about communication, I'm like, you need to see this. Yeah. Let's go through it together. It is so helpful in like being able to concisely, assertively say what needs to be said. And this, if you think about it, this is a lot of the points that we talked about earlier in like conflict resolution put together in one concise like communication script.
Right.
I love it.
I think it's a great summary. Dear Man.
Dear Man.
I love it.
Okay, well, that was a very long-winded story, but that was my story.
No, it's very insightful. Like, I really liked how you started, from your roots, like your childhood, and how that shaped your experience with your friends, and then how has that also shaped your experience and your journey with Adi, your partner. So it was really beautifully and well put together. And thank you for sharing, because, it's not easy. I know this too, like to share and be vulnerable on this podcast. So thank you for doing that. Yeah, well, thank you for listening. Such a good listener. Of course. I try. Still working on my listening skills. No, I'm guilty of listening to respond, especially in heated moments. So, I'm definitely guilty of that.
We are works in progress.
Right. Work in progress. My story is a little bit similar to yours. I tried to go into some details, give specific examples, but of course, the bigger picture kind of relates to what you say. So, we talked about how conflict avoidance is something that was common growing up, and that was for me as well. It was definitely a shared experience between me and my sister. So it was a household thing. It was modeled. Conflict, I would say, was avoided about 90% of the time growing up. It was just completely avoided. Things did get heated, conflict did occur, but again, it was the silent treatment or the resentment. So we got the sides, we got the slams on the cabinets and the doors, we got the dishes, doing the dishes loudly. It was just all of that. And then of course, once they get over it internally, not really externally, not resolving appropriately, they act like nothing happened. It's either that or the end all be all, elders had the last say no matter what, and that's it. That's the end game. And so I do like remember also, like I also had the tendency of arguing and fighting with my mom and sister a lot growing up. So lots of conflicts with each other. It would be unhealthy. It would get heated. Emotions would be flowing. Voices would be raised. And it was almost like a snowball effect. So like, I think one of the things that we talked about was, you know, the emotional manipulation, but also the just being defensive and just spiraling and doing that snowballing. So like my mom would do that. Like she would get upset about me one thing and then list a whole another 10 things that she's not happy about. So, and then in those moments, like I would just feel heartbroken or I would just get upset because again, right, it could affect, it's a personal attack. I could feel like, you know, everything I'm doing is wrong. Especially when I was younger. And I think this is why nowadays I don't do well with people like raising their voice at me or giving me the silent treatment that we talked about. And so now I'm like, oh, I need to avoid these types of reactions. Like if I make someone upset, they're going to raise their voice at me or they're going to give me silent treatment. They're going to be upset with me. So it made me become the extreme people pleaser that we've talked about in the last couple episodes. So I like kind of start also like in the high school years. Like I remember this one instance where it was like Friday after prayers. We were about to eat dinner together as a family. For some reason, I don't know why, like my mom was in a bad mood and she started nagging or getting upset about me not doing like a task or chore. Like I don't remember exactly what it was, but she was just getting upset at me. And I also was feisty. I was a feisty child. Like I did not take it. Like I would always talk back to her or like to both my parents. That's something like I've noticed about myself is like when it comes to my parents, I always felt comfortable to talk back to them. And like I'm noticing like, you know, sometimes I get those tendencies with like other elders or like not my direct family, but then I have to like be like, oh, like, you know, they're not my mom and dad. Like I can't talk back all the time. And so, you know, I did talk back and of course things got, you know, heated. And it spoiled that dinner. And so it was just like everybody was upset. And she would give me silent treatment during dinner and after dinner. And then she used humor as a way of avoiding. So like afterwards, she would just be like, oh, Inaya, like that's my sister. She'd be like, Inaya, there's a balloon in the room. And basically she's just like talking about me, like blown up, like, you know, I'm upset. She'd be like, Inaya, suilato, which means like, can you get a needle so I can pop the new balloon? And she would just like try to make me laugh and like try to like get over it. And of course, like I would laugh and you know, we would never have a resolving conversation about what happened, like why that happened or how we can be better. And so, you know, it took me time, but I'm still working on it. When I said this earlier in the beginning of this episode too, like conflict is something that I'm still very much fearful of. Like I'm still actively working on it. I'm still fully accepting like conflict is normal. Conflict can happen, and I'm very comfortable like when conflict happens, but there are tendencies that I still feel like, you know, discomfort internally, like, oh, like, I don't like this. And I sometimes tend to overthink, like, does this person not, like, you know, did they not like me as a whole person, or is it just the situation, right? Are they going to change the way they think about me now because of this conflict or because of me confronting this conflict? And I think this is part of my aspects, like every relationship, I would say, like, I still am working towards like the fear of conflict. But like in more recent times, like I said, like I think it's been more easy for my parent, like the change to happen with my parents. So like, you know, recently I've been doing self-work, I've been doing therapy. And so I'm learning how to think before I speak, not reacting emotionally and impulsively right away with like I used to. So like in situation where my mom would get heated now, like I would react differently. And I've noticed that. She's noticed that. She's mentioned to me. I was like, I noticed like we don't really fight back and forth anymore. And she was like as much anymore. And she was like, yeah, we don't. And I was like, I wonder why. You know, what did I do differently these last couple of years, you know? And she's like, I don't know, therapy. And I was like, yeah.
Like pop quiz and auntie.
Right. Have you ever seen that funny meme of like this is off topic, but like if I got rich, what's the first thing I'm gonna do? Like make everybody in my family do therapy, like pay for their therapy. Have you ever seen that?
I think I've I've heard of that one. Yeah,
Like,
I love
like
that.
you know, the Oprah Winfrey, like, you get therapy, you get therapy,
You get
you
it.
get therapy, everybody gets therapy.
I love that.
Yes, sorry, that was my little tangent. And so recently so my sister like just finished college, and there was, you know, a couple years ago, she was having some struggles in college. She went out of state for college, and so really far away. She went to New York, and we grew up in Texas, and so like I was across the country, and my parents were very hesitant at first to let her go, but she made that decision to go. But you know, my mom understandably didn't want her to go, and you know, I, during the application process, just supported my sister, like didn't give her any opinion, like whatsoever. Like I told her, you make your own decision on where you want to go. So like maybe like around her sophomore, junior year, like things got tough for her. She was struggling like health-wise too. And immediately like my mom like blamed me. Like she was like, if Michelle, like if you hadn't pushed her to go to out of state, like she wouldn't be struggling at all because she would be home with me. So like she immediately, and she was so stuck on that, like she would repeat that over and over again, and like it would just like eat at me, like even after I would try to ignore it. So I was like extremely hurt. But in that moment, like I tried to not yell about it or talk back right away. I kind of took some time and recollected how I want to approach this. And maybe like I think I slept on it, and the next day, like when both of us were not, you know, heated, I like sat down with my mom and I was like, hey, like that didn't feel good. Like it's not reasonable for you to blame me because I didn't. Like you're acting like, you know, I put like chains on my sister's wrist to like, and took her to New York. Like I didn't do that. Like she made her own decision. And she like listened and she apologized, which was like a first. Like I know it was crazy, but it was appreciated. But again, it's not a straight line. Like literally a couple days ago, like we were doing wedding planning stuff, and my mom and I were going back and forth. I reacted emotionally, impulsively, right? Because it's not a straight line. And like it got really heated, and I hung up, like cried about it. And then she calls me 10 minutes later, like asking if I was upset. But then like that's it. Like she just like didn't really like she just tried to avoid it. She was like, "Oh, I'm just trying to help you." Like that's it. And then, like in that moment, and like I was in this, it was over the phone. Like I was in the space to like do what I did before, right? Like sit down and talk with her. So again, not a straight line, but I will say like these experiences have still spilled over in other aspects of my life, like I mentioned earlier. Even like just with friends and with Alima, my partner, like I'm still working on like how to approach conflict and like what we talked about, right? Like a factual way and like my I statement way, like what my feelings are. And so, you know, that's something that I'm slowly working and actively working on currently, because it's not easy to when you grew up in a place where conflict was avoided and you were taught and modeled, right? It was modeled for you and you were taught like it's okay to avoid conflict. And so it became your normal. But when you know, when I stepped out of that bubble and realized like that's not normal, like it's unhealthy actually to avoid conflict. It can build resentment. It can, you know, hurt relationships rather than help them. Now I'm like undoing all that work, which is like years and years of things that were drilled in my head.
Decades.
Yeah. So conflict is normal. I'm going to keep saying that out loud.
Conflict is normal.
That's going to be my affirmation.
Conflict is normal. Conflict is normal.
I will accept conflicts. I will embrace conflicts. Dear man.
Dear man. I will dear man conflicts.
There you go. And it's helpful. Yeah. Like the acronym is really helpful. It's very tangible. So I'm glad you shared that.
Yeah.
Definitely will stick with me. I'll be sure to mention it to like anybody
therapist. Googles. Yeah, and if you like Google it, like you will find this. This is not something I came up with. This is something that exists out there. Google Dear Man, you'll see it.
Yeah. So that's my story, a little background with me and my conflicts.
You're right. We do have a pretty similar story. Like with a lot of things we're finding.
Right.
As we knew somewhat of it.
Right. But it's insightful.
It is. And I think it also adds definitely this element of normalizing, you know, the experience. Because sometimes, you know, when you're like younger, like you might not really see other people necessarily going through what you're going through. And that could feel pretty alienating of like, oh, this is only happening to me. And like, nobody else is like, you know, parents do this, or like whatever. You know, comparisons just don't go towards your kids. Sometimes kids think it too. These, you know, this friend's parents don't do this.
Yeah.
But it's hard. But, you know, as we are both proving, despite both having gone to therapy, despite being a therapist on my end, this is a journey that we are continuously working towards. And like, you know, that's life. There are certain things that you will continuously work towards. We're not all perfect. We're all works in progress.
Yeah. And it's all interconnected.
It's all interconnected.
I feel like if we like listened to all of our episodes and had like a nickel or a dime every time we said people pleaser, we would be rich. I feel like I mentioned it almost in every single episode. Because it's all connected. You'd be right. It's all connected.
It really is.
Yeah. All right, should we wrap it up?
Let us wrap it up. I think this is possibly our longest episode.
I know, right? Woohoo. Lots of good content. Okay, so if any of this resonated with you, or if you would like to share your experience with maybe relationships and resolving conflict with relationships, we would love to hear from you. You can reach us
especially if, you know, I will say real quick, especially if any listeners have relationship conflict being resolved in a healthy way in their Desi household, please give us a shout out. We would love to hear what that was like.
Right. Yes. But also if you don't have that as well, like we would love to hear from that as well.
Yeah. I'd love to hear if this is just everybody's thing.
Right. So our email is talks.asiantome@gmail.com, or you can reach us to our socials, which is our handle @talks.asiantome. Thank you so much for listening. Bye, everyone.
Bye.